What if one simple question could shake the mind of one of the most brilliant innovators alive? It was a chilly evening in Los Angeles when Joe Rogan's podcast studio buzzed with a unique energy. The lights were dim just enough to create an intimate atmosphere, the kind where secrets seemed to whisper in the air. Fans around the world were tuning in live, their comments flooding the chat, eager for what many promised would be a historic conversation. Elon Musk, the enigmatic billionaire known for launching rockets and electric cars, was about to step into Joe's world, a place where honesty was prized above all, and no question was off-limits. The air was thick with anticipation. Joe sat calmly behind the microphone, his trademark curiosity burning in his eyes. Elon was running late, which was unusual. When he finally arrived, there was something different about him, an edge of distraction, a flicker of something unspoken beneath the surface. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Joe began, breaking the ice with his usual charm, but inside, he felt the weight of the moment. The cameras rolled, mics clicked on, and the world was about to witness something no one expected. Elon smiled briefly but didn't say much at first, eyes scanning the room as if weighing every word before speaking. Joe dove in with the usual questions about Tesla's future, SpaceX's next mission, and the whirlwind of innovation surrounding the man, but the usual Elon charm was tempered by something deeper, a hint of doubt, a shadow of vulnerability. The audience felt it too, the tension rising like electricity before a storm. As the minutes passed, Joe sensed an opening, a crack in the armor, but wasn't quite sure how to push through. He glanced at his notes, then tossed them aside, deciding to trust his instincts. The conversation turned unexpectedly toward Elon's personal fears, the heavy toll of his relentless ambition. Elon hesitated, then admitted for the first time publicly that the pressure was enormous, that sometimes he questioned the cost of his own dreams. The chat exploded with surprise and empathy. Joe leaned in, feeling the story take shape. He knew that if he could ask the one question, the question that might unearth Elon's deepest truth, this interview could be more than just talk. It could change everything. Outside the studio, the city lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, a rocket prepared to launch, symbolizing both hope and risk. Joe's voice lowered, steady but charged. Elon, if you had to ask yourself one question to really understand where you stand, what would it be? The silence that followed was heavy. Elon's eyes locked onto Joe's, the room shrinking to just the two of them. And then, with a breath that seemed to carry years of unspoken stories, Elon began to answer. What came next stunned everyone. It was a revelation so raw and unexpected that it rewrote the way the world saw him. But before we dive into that, hit subscribe and leave a comment below with where you're watching from. This story isn't just about Elon Musk or Joe Rogan, it's about the questions that push us forward when everything feels uncertain. What's the one thing that keeps you going when life gets tough? This moment, right here, might be the spark for a new beginning. As we unfold this story, remember, every giant has a shadow, every genius has doubts, and sometimes, the most surprising answers come from the simplest questions. Stay with me as we trace back to the origins of Joe and Elon's journeys, the struggles that shaped them, and the extraordinary dialogue that changed everything. What started as a routine podcast evolved into an intimate exploration of ambition, fear, and hope. The tale you're about to hear is filled with highs and lows, unexpected twists, and a climax that will stay with you long after the last word. So buckle up. This is more than an interview. It's a story about the human spirit, resilience, and the power of asking the right question at the right time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Joe Rogan's story was anything but straightforward. Born in Newark, New Jersey, Joe grew up in a world that constantly challenged him to find his own voice. His parents' divorce when he was just a child left a complicated mark. His father, a police officer, was distant and strict, while his mother struggled to keep the household steady. From a young age, Joe discovered he had a knack for making people laugh, using humor as both a shield and a bridge. Comedy became his refuge, a way to process the world's chaos and find connection in unexpected places. But comedy was only one piece of the puzzle. Joe's early fascination with martial arts was more than just a hobby, it was a discipline that grounded him, taught him focus and respect, and shaped his relentless work ethic. As a young adult, he pursued a career in stand-up comedy, grinding through endless clubs and small venues, always pushing himself to improve. The road was far from easy. Rejection and failure were constant companions, but Joe never lost the drive to explore new paths. His curiosity extended beyond the stage, he had an insatiable desire to understand people from all walks of life. This curiosity led him to the world of mixed martial arts commentary, where his passion for fighting met his gift for storytelling. For years, Joe's voice became synonymous with UFC events, capturing the drama and intensity inside the octagon. The crossover into podcasting came naturally. In 2009, Joe launched the Joe Rogan Experience with little fanfare, recording long-form conversations that ranged from comedy to science, politics, and everything in between. It was an unfiltered space where curiosity ruled, and no topic was taboo. The show exploded in popularity, attracting millions of listeners who appreciated Joe's genuine approach and his ability to bring out honesty in his guests. But behind the scenes, Joe wrestled with the challenge of balancing fame with authenticity. The relentless spotlight sometimes made him question who he really was beneath the public persona. His close friendships with fellow comedians, fighters, and scientists provided grounding, yet he often felt like an outsider looking in on worlds he both admired and struggled to fully belong to. Relationships were a complicated dance. Joe had been married once and had children, and the joys and struggles of family life added layers to his story. He cherished the moments with his loved ones but also knew that the demands of his career sometimes pulled him away. His bond with his best friends was a constant source of strength, especially those who shared his love of adventure and learning. These friendships were not just social ties, they were lifelines that helped Joe navigate the highs and lows of his journey. Joe's psychology was shaped by this blend of humor, discipline, curiosity, and a deep-seated hunger for meaning. He was drawn to people who challenged his thinking and pushed him beyond comfort zones. This drive sometimes led him into controversial territory, but Joe believed in the power of dialogue to break down walls and build understanding. His ability to connect with others stemmed from his authenticity, a rawness that made listeners feel like they were part of an intimate conversation, not just another interview. This desire to dig beneath the surface was precisely what made Joe perfect for the conversation with Elon Musk. He was not interested in the usual polished answers, he wanted to reach the core of the man behind the headlines. Joe's instincts told him that Elon's brilliance was paired with complexity and contradictions, and that the key to unlocking that was to create a space where vulnerability was possible. His podcast studio was more than a set, it was a haven where time slowed, and the focus was on real human connection. Before Elon arrived, Joe spent hours preparing, not by rehearsing questions but by reflecting on the kinds of moments that could open new doors in conversation. His own life experiences had taught him that breakthrough insights rarely came from surface-level talk but from the unexpected pauses, the unscripted confessions. And Joe was ready to lean into discomfort if it meant reaching that rare truth. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, Joe felt a stirring of nerves. Interviewing someone like Elon was a high-stakes moment. There was pressure to not only entertain but to capture something meaningful, something that would resonate far beyond the episode. For Joe, this was a chance to step into uncharted territory, to confront questions about ambition, failure, and the human cost of genius, questions he knew were as relevant to himself as they were to his guest. As the clock ticked closer to Elon's arrival, Joe reflected on the winding road that brought him here. From the awkward kid in New Jersey to one of the most influential voices in media, his journey was a testament to resilience and curiosity. He understood the power of stories to inspire change, to spark hope even in the darkest times. That understanding shaped every question he asked, every reaction he had, every silence he held. Joe's story was not just a backdrop, it was a lens through which the entire interview would unfold. And with that, the stage was set. Elon Musk's story, just as complicated and compelling, was about to intersect with Joe's in a way neither could predict. The conversation that followed would peel back layers of ambition, fear, and hope, revealing a side of Elon rarely seen and a moment of truth that would stun millions. But before that moment, there was more to uncover about Elon's past, the driving force behind the man who dared to dream of Mars and reshape the future. As Joe waited, he thought about the questions that pushed him forward, the relentless curiosity, the hunger for understanding, the courage to face the unknown. These were the threads that would weave the story ahead. And with that thought, the door opened, and Elon Musk stepped inside, carrying with him the weight of a lifetime's ambition and a question waiting to be asked. Elon Musk's journey was forged in the fires of hardship and relentless ambition long before he became a household name. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon was a curious and introverted child who found solace in books and technology. His father, Elon Musk, was a complex figure, brilliant in his own right but distant and often harsh. Growing up, Elon faced bullying at school, sometimes cruel and isolating, which only deepened his inward focus. Books became his escape, and by the age of 10, he was already teaching himself computer programming, building video games, and dreaming of worlds beyond his own. The isolation of his childhood, combined with his innate intellect, set the stage for a mind that would challenge the limits of possibility. But life was far from easy. His parents' divorce created a fractured home life, and Elon was often caught between competing influences. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, he developed an intense drive to succeed. In his teenage years, Elon began to imagine life beyond South Africa, a place where he could build, create, and explore without limits. His decision to immigrate to North America was both bold and risky. He first moved to Canada at 17, attending Queen's University in Ontario before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania. The transition was jarring, a new culture, new challenges, and the weight of starting over in a foreign land. But Elon's determination never wavered. At Penn, he excelled academically, studying physics and economics, fields that would later underpin his revolutionary ventures. Early on, Elon showed a tendency to think big, so big that many dismissed his ideas as unrealistic or overly ambitious. After graduation, he moved to Silicon Valley, the heart of the tech revolution, eager to make his mark. His first venture, Zip2, was a modest software company designed to provide online city guides for newspapers. It was a small success but taught Elon valuable lessons about startups, competition, and the high stakes of entrepreneurship. The eventual sale of Zip2 gave Elon his first taste of financial success, but he was far from satisfied. He wanted more, not just wealth but impact. Next came X.com, an online payment company that later became PayPal, revolutionizing how people sent money over the internet. Yet even with this breakthrough, Elon's path was riddled with challenges. Conflicts with partners, fierce competition, and the dot-com crash tested his resilience. His departure from PayPal after it was acquired by eBay was bittersweet. It was a moment of triumph and loss, and Elon found himself hungry for a new frontier. That frontier came in the form of SpaceX. The dream of reaching Mars and making humanity multiplanetary consumed him. Space exploration was once the domain of governments and giants, but Elon wanted to disrupt the status quo, build reusable rockets, and push the limits of what was possible. Early failures nearly bankrupted the company. Rockets exploded on the launch pad, investors doubted him, and many called him crazy. Yet Elon's resolve was unshaken. At the same time, Tesla Motors emerged, with its goal to revolutionize the automotive industry by creating electric cars that were not just environmentally friendly but desirable and high-performing. The stakes were astronomical, billions of dollars, countless jobs, and a future that hinged on innovation. Elon's leadership style was famously intense, sometimes described as ruthless. He demanded perfection and worked himself to exhaustion, often sleeping on the factory floor. His vision was clear, but the personal cost was high. His marriage to Justine Musk ended in divorce, strained by the pressures of his growing empire. Later, his relationship with Tallulah Riley followed a similarly turbulent path. Despite these challenges, Elon was driven by a deeper purpose. He saw his work as a mission to save humanity from itself, to solve climate change, reduce dependence on fossil fuels, and prepare for an uncertain future in space. Yet beneath the public image of the fearless innovator was a man wrestling with loneliness, doubt, and the heavy burden of expectations. Elon rarely spoke publicly about his personal struggles, but those close to him described moments of vulnerability hidden behind the media spotlight. His family relationships were complicated. With siblings spread around the world and a complicated relationship with his father, Elon often felt the weight of isolation. Friends noted his tendency to retreat into work when faced with emotional pain, using innovation as both escape and purpose. This paradox of brilliance mixed with vulnerability made Elon a fascinating and sometimes enigmatic figure. In his rare moments of reflection, Elon admitted to fearing failure, not just for himself, but for the future of humanity. He understood the precariousness of his position. One misstep could derail years of progress and disappoint millions who looked to him as a visionary. Yet he also believed in the power of resilience and second chances. Throughout his career, Elon faced setbacks that would have ended lesser men. But his ability to learn from failure, pivot quickly, and inspire his teams kept pushing the boundaries. His story was not one of effortless success but of relentless struggle against odds that seemed insurmountable. It was this complexity that Joe Rogan hoped to tap into during their interview. Behind the headlines and bold statements, there was a deeply human story of ambition, sacrifice, and the quest for meaning. Elon's journey was marked by triumphs and heartbreaks, innovations and controversies, a journey that mirrored the turbulent and often unpredictable nature of life itself. As Elon prepared to step into Joe's studio that evening, the layers of his past were never far from his mind. Every success was shadowed by doubt, every achievement, by personal cost. Yet, through it all, Elon remained committed to the question that drove him: how could he use his mind and resources to change the world for the better? This question was not just a tagline for a billionaire, it was a lifelong obsession born from the very beginning of his story. And tonight, faced with Joe Rogan's probing curiosity, Elon would confront that question in a way he never had before. It was a moment of reckoning, a chance to reveal not just the visionary entrepreneur but the man behind the mask. As the lights dimmed and the microphones warmed up, Elon took a deep breath. The world was watching, but more importantly, so was he. What would his answer be when Joe asked the question that no one else dared to pose? The answer would shake the foundations of public perception and invite millions to see Elon Musk not just as a tech titan, but as a complex human being navigating the dizzying heights of ambition and the profound depths of vulnerability. This was the story unfolding now, a story that would challenge assumptions and inspire countless others to ask their own hard questions. Because sometimes, the path to greatness is found not in the loudest achievements, but in the quiet moments of self-reflection and courage. The stage was set for an interview unlike any other, but what neither Joe Rogan nor Elon Musk fully anticipated was how the rising tension beneath the surface would build into something electrifying. Their conversation began casually, with the usual exploration of Elon's groundbreaking ventures. SpaceX's next rocket launch, Tesla's push for full autonomy, and Neuralink's ambitious brain-computer interface. But beneath the technical jargon and futuristic dreams, a deeper conflict was quietly unfolding. Early on, Joe noticed something was off. Elon's usual confident, almost playful demeanor seemed muted, replaced by a restless energy. As the questions touched on the pressures of leadership and the sacrifices demanded by innovation, Elon's answers grew more guarded, and the pauses longer. The chat exploded with excitement over Tesla's latest achievements, but Joe sensed a tension not visible to the audience, a clash between public perception and private reality. It wasn't long before Joe decided to push beyond the surface. He asked about the personal toll of Elon's relentless drive, about the cracks appearing in relationships and the whispers of burnout. Elon's eyes flickered with something unspoken, a mix of frustration, fatigue, and perhaps regret. The conversation shifted from triumphs to struggles. Elon described the immense pressure he carried, the sleepless nights, and the crushing weight of expectations from investors, employees, and the world. He admitted feeling isolated, often misunderstood, and haunted by doubts despite his public image. This moment marked the first climax of the dialogue, a raw exposure of vulnerability that few had witnessed from the tech mogul. But just as the tension peaked, Joe brought in a note of hope, reminding Elon, and the audience, of the resilience that had carried him through past crises. Joe shared stories from his own life, moments when failure seemed inevitable but hope and support made all the difference. The chat took on a more personal tone, with Elon opening up about how friendships, family, and even his love for music helped him find balance. The audience felt the uplift, a glimpse of humanity behind the headlines. Yet, this hope was short-lived. The conversation soon turned back to the challenges ahead: regulatory battles, skepticism from industry peers, and the relentless pace of innovation that allowed no time to rest. Elon spoke of the constant threat of failure, the stakes so high that one mistake could undo everything. This second climax deepened the tension, underscoring the precarious tightrope Elon walked between vision and reality. The back and forth between crisis and hope created a powerful rhythm, like the rise and fall of a storm. The audience was hooked, drawn into the unfolding drama not just of a man but of a mission with global implications. Then came the unexpected turn. Joe, sensing a rare opportunity, asked a question that cut through the usual narratives: "Elon, with everything on the line, what's the one thing that scares you the most, not as a businessman, but as a human being?" The room held its breath. Elon's response was slow, measured, and deeply revealing. He spoke of fears that transcended stock prices and technical failures, fears of losing his sense of purpose, of failing the future generations who depended on his work, and most hauntingly, the fear of being forgotten or misunderstood. This admission broke through the final barrier, exposing the core of Elon's internal struggle. It was an emotional climax that stunned listeners worldwide. But even in this moment of raw honesty, hope flickered. Elon expressed a fierce commitment to pushing forward, driven by a belief that the sacrifices were necessary to forge a better tomorrow. Joe's follow-up questions delved into this paradox, the tension between vulnerability and unyielding ambition. The dialogue became a dance of contradictions, with Elon acknowledging his flaws while refusing to let them define his legacy. The tension between personal cost and public success, between doubt and determination, filled the air. The rising conflict was no longer just about external challenges but a profound internal battle that resonated deeply with anyone who had faced moments of uncertainty. As the conversation wound down, both men reflected on the lessons learned from their struggles, how failure could fuel growth, how hope could be a lifeline, and how the hardest questions often led to the most meaningful answers. The audience was left not only entertained but inspired, seeing in Elon a figure who embodied both the brilliance and the burdens of striving for greatness. This chapter of the story captured the essence of human complexity, the way conflict and hope coexist, shaping the paths we take. And as the podcast wrapped up, the world waited, breathless, for the next chapter, a climactic journey that would push Elon and Joe beyond the familiar and into uncharted territory, where new discoveries and even greater challenges awaited. What would happen when the man who reached for the stars faced questions that no technology could answer? The story was just beginning. After the tense and revealing conversation on the podcast, Elon Musk felt a stirring inside him that he hadn't expected. Joe Rogan's one question, the one about what scared him most, had cracked open a door Elon rarely allowed himself to approach. The following days weren't filled with the usual meetings or endless emails but with a strange sense of introspection. Elon found himself restless, compelled to take a journey of a different kind, not across space or technology, but deep within. He decided to step away from the boardrooms, away from the glare of the media, and retreat to a place where the weight of expectations felt lighter. Elon's destination was an isolated ranch in Texas, a sprawling property far from the buzzing cities and Silicon Valley hustle. The landscape was vast and wild, a stark contrast to the meticulously engineered worlds he was used to. Here, The horizon stretched endlessly, and the sky spilled stars like scattered diamonds. It was a place for silence, reflection, and confronting the questions Joe's interview had stirred. Elon's days on the ranch were spent in solitude, punctuated by walks across rugged terrain and hours staring at the night sky, imagining the infinite possibilities beyond Earth. But this journey wasn't just about escaping, it was about facing the fears and doubts that had lingered beneath his relentless ambition. Vivid memories surfaced, the relentless pressure of launching SpaceX's first successful rocket, the early days of Tesla's production hell, the media's relentless scrutiny. He relived moments of near failure, the heartbreak of relationships strained by his obsession with work, and the loneliness that accompanied being a visionary few truly understood. The ranch became a space of emotional confrontation. Elon allowed himself to feel the weight of those moments without the shield of technology or strategy. He journaled his thoughts, often writing late into the night, grappling with questions about legacy, purpose, and the meaning behind his relentless pursuit. But this inner journey was not solitary for long. Elon's closest confidant, his longtime friend and engineer, Gwynne Shotwell, visited the ranch unexpectedly. Gwynne had been instrumental in SpaceX's rise and understood better than most the complexity of Elon's drive and vulnerability. Their conversations were candid and raw, peeling back layers of ambition to reveal the human beneath the myth. Gwynne challenged Elon gently but firmly, reminding him that genius alone was not enough, that leadership required empathy, balance, and a willingness to embrace imperfection. She urged him to consider what success would mean if it came at the cost of personal peace. This new perspective struck Elon deeply, stirring both resistance and clarity. The conversations with Gwynne sparked a turning point. Elon realized that the journey ahead wasn't just about technological breakthroughs but about evolving himself. To lead humanity toward a future on Mars and a sustainable Earth, he first needed to reconcile the man he was with the man he wanted to become. As days passed, Elon began to plan differently. He envisioned projects not just in terms of disruption and dominance but with a deeper sense of responsibility and humanity. The Tesla factory, for instance, was no longer just a production line but a community of workers whose well-being mattered as much as innovation. SpaceX's mission took on a renewed urgency, not just to reach Mars, but to inspire and unify people behind a hopeful vision. The ranch's vast open spaces seemed to mirror the openness Elon was trying to cultivate within himself. He also began to explore new passions, photography, music, and even meditation, practices that felt alien to him but offered unexpected solace. This chapter of Elon's life was filled with vivid contrasts. The rugged Texas landscape against the intricate designs of spacecraft, moments of fierce solitude balanced by profound connection with friends like Gwynne. Every day was a test of patience and humility, a lesson in surrendering control without losing sight of his dreams. Yet, this journey was not without its challenges. Old habits surfaced, impatience, frustration with slow progress, and the haunting fear of failure. There were moments when Elon questioned whether stepping back was a sign of weakness or distraction from his mission. But each time doubt crept in, he remembered Joe's question and the importance of facing what scared him most. The turning point came one evening under the endless stars. Elon stood outside, looking up at the night sky, feeling the immensity of the universe and his place within it. The silence was profound. In that moment, he felt a surge of clarity and peace. The journey he was on was not just about reaching the stars but about becoming whole, embracing vulnerability alongside strength, fear alongside hope. This emotional and spiritual awakening marked the climax of his journey, a profound shift that would ripple through everything he did next. Elon returned from the ranch not just recharged but transformed. His interactions with teams at SpaceX and Tesla showed a new level of empathy and openness. Decisions were still bold and visionary but tempered with patience and understanding. He began speaking more openly about mental health, the challenges of leadership, and the importance of community, conversations that resonated deeply with the public and employees alike. This change did not go unnoticed. Investors, journalists, and fans observed a new dimension to Elon's leadership, one that acknowledged imperfection and celebrated growth. The narrative shifted from the infallible genius to a complex, relatable human striving for impact beyond personal success. Joe Rogan's question had set in motion a journey that reshaped not just Elon's story but the future of his companies and projects. The climactic journey wasn't just a physical retreat or a break from work, it was a transformative process that redefined what it meant to lead in an era of rapid change. This chapter revealed a man willing to confront his deepest fears and emerge with a vision that included not only technological progress but human progress. As Elon prepared to share this new chapter with the world, he understood that the greatest adventure was still ahead, both for humanity and for himself. The journey from fear to hope was ongoing, a path marked by challenges, discoveries, and profound growth. And as he stepped back into the public eye, Elon Musk was no longer just the visionary entrepreneur chasing impossible dreams. He was a man who had stared into the void and found not despair, but a new kind of courage. A courage born from honesty, reflection, and the unyielding belief that the future could be better if we dared to ask the hard questions and embrace the answers. The story was far from over. In fact, it was entering its most thrilling phase, one filled with new challenges, deeper insights, and a message that would resonate far beyond the tech world. The climactic journey had changed everything, and it was only just beginning. The emotional climax of Elon Musk's story unfolded in a way few expected, a moment where the public persona of the fearless innovator met the raw, unfiltered reality of the man behind the headlines. It happened during a private meeting at SpaceX headquarters, a gathering meant to celebrate a milestone but that instead became a crucible for truth and transformation. Elon had just returned from the Texas ranch, carrying with him the profound changes from his recent journey. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The team was eager to share the news of a breakthrough in rocket technology that promised to accelerate their Mars mission. But beneath the excitement, Elon was wrestling with something far deeper. As the meeting progressed, Elon grew quieter, more introspective. The usual bravado gave way to a vulnerability that caught his closest colleagues off guard. Then, unexpectedly, Elon shared a revelation, a confession about the toll the relentless pursuit of his dreams had taken on him emotionally and personally. He spoke of sleepless nights haunted by doubts, relationships strained almost to breaking, and a fear that despite his successes, he might still fail in the most important ways. His voice trembled at times, a rare crack in the armor of the man who seemed unbreakable to the world. This was the first peak of the emotional climax, a moment that stunned the room and sent ripples through those present. But then, just as the weight of his confession settled, Elon pivoted to hope. He spoke about the lessons learned on the Texas ranch, about embracing vulnerability not as weakness but as a source of strength. He shared how opening up had allowed him to reconnect with his team, his family, and himself. The room felt the shift, a collective breath of relief and inspiration. Elon's words transformed the meeting from a routine update into a profound sharing of humanity. The team responded with warmth, support, and renewed energy, showing that hope could emerge even in the darkest moments. Yet the emotional climax was far from over. Shortly after this meeting, Elon faced a public crisis that tested the very core of his resilience. A critical failure at the Tesla factory led to a major production delay, triggering intense media scrutiny and investor anxiety. Social media exploded with criticism, and Elon found himself once again in the eye of a storm. The pressure was immense, the stakes higher than ever. But this time, instead of retreating behind silence or defiance, Elon confronted the crisis head-on. He released a heartfelt video message acknowledging the challenges, admitting mistakes, and pledging transparency and accountability. His authenticity struck a chord with many, humanizing him in ways no press release ever could. This public display of vulnerability marked the second peak of the emotional climax, a turning point where fear and hope collided on a global stage. The response was mixed, but overwhelmingly, people saw a leader willing to be honest and accountable, not just a tech titan insulated from failure. Behind the scenes, Elon's personal life was also in turmoil. The strain of his work had taken a toll on his relationship with Grimes, the mother of his child. They faced public speculation, rumors of separation, and the challenges of balancing parenthood with relentless ambition. Elon's willingness to discuss these struggles openly on social media broke taboos about the challenges of high-profile relationships, resonating with many who faced similar difficulties in private. This openness was part of the emotional climax's power, a reminder that no one, no matter how successful, is immune to the complexities of love, family, and sacrifice. The emotional climax reached its fullest expression in a candid interview Elon gave to a major news outlet shortly after the Tesla crisis. For the first time, he spoke at length about his fears of failure, his struggles with mental health, and the importance of asking for help. He urged others not to shy away from vulnerability but to embrace it as a path to growth. The interview was widely shared and sparked important conversations about leadership, mental health, and the human side of innovation. Critics and supporters alike recognized the courage it took for Elon to break the mold of the invincible billionaire and reveal his imperfections. This moment was a seismic shift, not just in Elon's story but in the broader narrative of success and masculinity. The emotional climax was not just about a single event but a series of revelations that peeled back layers of myth and image, showing a man grappling honestly with his fears and hopes. It illustrated the power of vulnerability to inspire connection and change. Yet, even at this peak, Elon's journey was not complete. The emotional climax set the stage for transformation, but the road ahead would require continued courage and resilience. The public and private challenges were intertwined, each feeding into the other, creating a complex web that Elon had to navigate with care. As this chapter closed, Elon emerged more authentic and accessible, a leader who had faced his deepest fears and come out stronger. The emotional climax was a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure and evolve, a powerful chapter in a story that would inspire many to embrace their own vulnerabilities and keep moving forward. It was a moment of truth that shattered illusions and built bridges, reminding us all that beneath every great achievement lies a human heart capable of fear, hope, and profound growth. After the emotional storm that had rocked Elon Musk's world, a period of calm reflection settled in, a rare space where the chaos of innovation and public scrutiny paused long enough for deep contemplation. Elon found himself in a place that felt unfamiliar but necessary, quiet acceptance. The resolution of his journey was not a sudden epiphany or a dramatic victory but a slow unfolding of understanding about what truly mattered. As he looked back over the years, the triumphs, the failures, the personal sacrifices, Elon realized that the pursuit of greatness was not merely about pushing humanity forward technologically but about growing as a person who could lead with heart as well as mind. The lessons he had learned were profound yet simple. Love, family, and connection were not distractions from his mission but the foundation upon which any meaningful success was built. This awareness brought new clarity and peace. Elon began to prioritize relationships that had often been sidelined, spending more time with his children, reconnecting with old friends, and nurturing the bonds that sustained him. He found joy in the small, everyday moments, a smile from his child, a shared meal, a quiet conversation. These were the true victories. Professionally, Elon's vision evolved to include not only grand ambitions like colonizing Mars but also creating a sustainable Earth where communities thrived and individuals felt valued. He championed initiatives within Tesla and SpaceX that focused on employee well-being and social responsibility. He spoke openly about the importance of balancing innovation with empathy, inspiring a new generation of entrepreneurs to rethink what success meant. The resolution was also deeply philosophical. Elon began to explore questions about legacy, not just in terms of what he would leave behind but how he would be remembered, as a man who cared, who was flawed but brave enough to grow. This reflection brought humility, a recognition that no one achieves greatness alone. The support of family, friends, and even critics played a vital role in shaping his path. This chapter closed with Elon sharing his insights in a heartfelt essay published on his website and social media platforms. He wrote about the surprises life threw at him, the fears he faced, and the love that ultimately led the way. The message was clear and resonant: life's true power comes not from achievements alone but from the relationships and lessons that shape our hearts. This resolution offered a hopeful and inspiring end to a turbulent chapter, reminding everyone that even the most driven among us must pause, reflect, and reconnect. Elon Musk's story, far from being just about technology or business, had become a testament to the human spirit's capacity for growth, love, and resilience. It was a new beginning, not just for Elon but for all who followed his journey. And as the world watched, the promise of what was yet to come shimmered on the horizon, full of possibility and hope. The story of Elon Musk after his profound moment of reflection took on a new energy, one that blended his visionary spirit with a fresh understanding of balance and connection. But even as he embraced this new phase, challenges and surprises continued to emerge, reminding him, and the world, that growth is never linear. The chapter opened with Elon preparing to unveil Tesla's latest innovation, a breakthrough battery technology promising to revolutionize energy storage and accelerate the shift to sustainable transportation worldwide. The announcement was highly anticipated, with media and investors buzzing with excitement and skepticism. Elon approached the launch with a calm confidence shaped by recent reflections but was acutely aware of the high stakes involved. This wasn't just another product reveal, it was a test of whether the lessons he had learned about patience, transparency, and empathy would translate into real-world leadership under pressure. As the event unfolded in a packed auditorium, Elon's presentation combined technical mastery with heartfelt storytelling. He spoke not only about the specs and capabilities but also about the vision behind the innovation. The urgent need to address climate change, the importance of collaboration across industries, and the responsibility of technology to serve humanity. The audience responded with enthusiasm, but Elon knew the real work was just beginning. Behind the scenes, Tesla's engineers faced unexpected setbacks as they moved from prototype to mass production. The team grappled with supply chain disruptions, quality control issues, and the intense pressure to meet ambitious deadlines. Elon's leadership was tested once again, but this time, his approach was different. He prioritized open communication, fostering a culture where concerns could be raised without fear, and setbacks were viewed as learning opportunities rather than failures. He invested time in mentoring his team, listening deeply to their challenges, and encouraging collaboration. This shift brought renewed energy and resilience, helping the company navigate the turbulent transition. Meanwhile, Elon's personal life continued to evolve. His relationship with Grimes remained complex but deeply meaningful, grounded in mutual respect and shared values despite public scrutiny. They embraced parenthood with a sense of wonder and vulnerability, balancing their intense careers with the joys and challenges of raising a child in the spotlight. Elon's willingness to share glimpses of his family life humanized him further, building a bridge between his larger-than-life persona and the everyday realities he faced. Throughout this period, Elon also deepened his involvement in philanthropic efforts, channeling resources into education, renewable energy access in underserved communities, and mental health initiatives. He viewed giving back not as a duty but as a natural extension of his purpose, to use his influence and resources to make the world a better place. Public response was mixed but largely positive, with many applauding the integration of innovation and compassion in his evolving leadership style. The chapter's tension arose when a sudden crisis struck. A major accident during a SpaceX test flight led to a temporary halt in the Mars mission timeline. The incident drew intense media criticism and reignited doubts about Elon's ability to balance visionary ambition with practical risk management. The pressure was immense, threatening to undo the progress made in public trust. But Elon faced the crisis with honesty and humility. He immediately took responsibility, expressed empathy for those affected, and committed to a thorough investigation and corrective action. His transparent communication calmed investors and supporters, reinforcing the message that accountability and learning from mistakes were integral to success. This response became a defining moment, showcasing the growth Elon had undergone since the emotional climax. The chapter closed on a note of cautious optimism. While challenges remained, Elon's journey illustrated that resilience and openness could turn setbacks into stepping stones. His story continued to inspire, not just as a tale of technological breakthroughs but as a human saga of struggle, growth, and hope. The balance between tension and hope, ambition and empathy, set the tone for what lay ahead. This chapter marked a turning point where the future was not only about reaching new frontiers but about doing so with a heart grounded in understanding and connection. With renewed public trust and an evolving personal philosophy, Elon Musk entered a phase that felt unlike any before. It was no longer about breaking news every week or making headlines with jaw-dropping ambitions. This stage was about anchoring that ambition into something lasting, real change, real impact, and real human connection. His ventures were running at full throttle. Tesla's battery innovation, now rolling out worldwide, had transformed not just the electric vehicle industry but entire national energy grids. Solar storage systems were being integrated in remote areas that had never had reliable electricity. SpaceX, though bruised by the recent test flight accident, had returned to a stable launch cadence, with Starlink finally achieving global coverage and providing internet access to parts of the world that had previously been in total digital darkness. Yet, even as things seemed to stabilize, Elon remained aware that comfort was never permanent in his line of work. The intensity had shifted, not in the pace, but in the depth of his leadership. He began to challenge his own companies with a new internal mantra: sustainable greatness. It was no longer enough to be first. Now, he wanted Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and the Boring Company to be good, ethically sound, operationally resilient, and culturally conscious. This began with listening. Elon held weekly roundtables with employees across all levels, both virtually and in person, creating safe spaces for honest feedback. He brought in mental health counselors for staff, promoted women and underrepresented voices into leadership roles, and began to dismantle the always grind culture that had once defined his early startups. It wasn't easy. Some longtime executives pushed back, arguing that softening the edge would slow them down. Elon's past image, the perfectionist who slept on the factory floor and expected the same from his team, wasn't easy to shake. But he stayed the course. He had learned, painfully and thoroughly, that speed without sustainability was a broken promise. That mental and emotional health were not luxuries but non-negotiables if he truly wanted to lead humans to Mars and back. Then came an unexpected turn. A leaked internal memo from a former SpaceX engineer painted a troubling picture of high-pressure environments, missed safety checks, and internal disputes over launch procedures. The media pounced, and regulators demanded immediate answers. Elon's instinct was to get defensive. The old version of him would have responded with cold data and maybe a tweet mocking the article. But he didn't. He read the memo in full, met with the engineers named in the report, and instead of discrediting the whistleblower, he invited them to speak directly with senior leadership, without fear of retaliation. The moment was tense. The internal investigation revealed gaps that had been overlooked in the scramble to recover from the earlier launch failure. Elon responded not by punishing scapegoats but by taking responsibility himself. In a live-streamed all-hands meeting, he said, "Our mission is too important to lose our humanity in the process. We won't compromise safety. We won't compromise integrity. If we're truly going to lead the future, we must be worthy of the trust the world places in us." That statement rippled through not just the company, but the broader tech world. It was a marked shift from the Elon Musk who had once brushed off controversies with sarcasm and distraction. This Elon was grounded. Firm, yes. But now tempered with humility. As the company implemented reforms, Musk worked closely with the newly established Red Team, a group of internal experts tasked with stress-testing operations, culture, and safety from within. Their mission, to hold the company accountable even when it was uncomfortable. Elon's transparency and willingness to confront criticism head-on earned him renewed respect. Not just from fans or employees, but from skeptics who'd long dismissed him as reckless. In parallel, Elon took the stage at the United Nations Climate Summit in Oslo, not as a billionaire showman, but as a thoughtful innovator. His keynote wasn't about Tesla's market share or SpaceX's launch schedule, but about responsibility. He spoke of future generations. Of the ethical obligations of technology leaders. He quoted Carl Sagan. He paused when talking about the Earth as a pale blue dot, his voice catching slightly as he described looking out at the stars in Texas and realizing how fragile it all was. It was a side of Elon the world rarely saw. And it moved people. At the summit's close, he was approached by political leaders, young climate activists, and skeptical academics, all wanting to talk, not about product releases, but about values. The message was clear: Musk had grown into a statesman of the future. He wasn't perfect. He still fired off impulsive tweets, still stumbled in interviews. But the changes were undeniable. A balance had formed, one foot in the stars, the other planted firmly on the ground. Around this time, Joe Rogan invited him back on the podcast. The buzz was instant. Their last conversation had gone viral, and this one carried even more weight. Joe opened by referencing Elon's famous line from the first interview, about fear, about being forgotten. "Now, I just try to be understood by the right people, the people who care." The conversation flowed from there, deeper and more philosophical than ever. They talked about parenting, legacy, artificial intelligence, and what it meant to live a meaningful life. Elon spoke of his son, of his fears for the world, and of his hope that humanity would mature into a species capable not just of surviving, but of thriving with wisdom. The podcast ended with Joe asking a final question: if everything ended tomorrow, what would you want your kids to remember about you? Elon looked down, nodded quietly, and answered, that I tried. That I loved them. And that the future mattered to me. Silence followed. The internet exploded within hours, not with memes or outrage, but with a rare, collective stillness. A sense that we were watching something evolve, not just a man, but a mindset. In classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms, people talked about it. Young engineers and startup founders started quoting Elon's UN speech. Critics who once dismissed him as ego-driven reconsidered. And more than a few decided to revisit their own leadership styles. Elon Musk had not become flawless. But in a world that often demands binary judgment, hero or villain, genius or madman, he had become something far more powerful: human. That humanity, once hidden beneath layers of ambition and tech, was now leading the way. And the journey, though long and unpredictable, was beginning to feel like it had a purpose far greater than any single launch or company valuation. The future no longer rested on rockets or robots alone. It rested on whether we, like Elon, were willing to grow, to reflect, and to lead with both intelligence and heart. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the world slowly adjusted to this newly humanized Elon Musk, something remarkable began to unfold, not just around him, but because of him. The ripple effects of his personal transformation began influencing others in leadership, innovation, and everyday life. In Silicon Valley, a place once built on relentless competition and burnout glory, whispers of change became waves. CEOs who had once idolized the old Elon, the tireless, sleep on the factory floor version, were now re-evaluating their own models of leadership. He had shown that transparency, vulnerability, and introspection didn't diminish genius, they elevated it. He began receiving invitations to speak at places he'd never prioritized before: universities, wellness conferences, humanitarian summits. He accepted many of them, not because he needed the platform, but because the message had outgrown him. The idea that innovation must be human-centered, that progress without empathy was regression in disguise, became the new blueprint. Elon shared stories of failure more freely now. Not the polished, PR-approved failures, but the raw ones, the moments when he nearly walked away, when he lost people he loved, when his own ambition suffocated the very things that once gave him meaning. These stories didn't weaken his brand. They deepened it. They made him relatable. At a leadership forum in Berlin, when asked about what advice he'd give his younger self, he paused, then said, "I'd tell him to slow down. To listen more. To forgive himself faster." The room, filled with executives and students alike, sat in thoughtful silence. And then, something unexpected happened. The United Nations invited Elon to co-chair a new global initiative called Project Horizon, an international alliance focused on merging technology and ethics for the planet's long-term survival. This wasn't a tech summit or investment pitch. It was a coalition of scientists, philosophers, climate activists, and educators. Elon accepted, not as a dominant figure but as a collaborator. He understood now that real solutions would require more than disruption, they'd require humility and shared vision. At the first Project Horizon roundtable in Geneva, Elon sat beside people who had previously criticized him, climate watchdogs, academics who had labeled his companies as greenwashed capitalism, and ethical AI experts wary of Neuralink. But rather than defending his past choices, Elon leaned in. He asked questions. He listened. He admitted when they were right. And slowly, trust began to form. It was a far cry from the bombastic interviews and Twitter storms of his earlier years. It was a man, no longer hiding behind charisma or genius, showing up as a participant in the world he wanted to change. Meanwhile, back at home, Elon began dedicating more time to his children, something he admitted had been neglected during Tesla's early chaos. He helped them build rockets out of cardboard, taught them how to code, and listened as they asked questions about the stars. These moments, simple and unspectacular to outsiders, were becoming his anchors. He no longer saw them as detours from work but as the actual substance of life. Grimes and Elon, despite their complicated public narrative, developed a rhythm that worked for them. Co-parenting, mutual support, and shared artistic exploration redefined their bond. Elon became more involved in the creative side of his ventures, inspired by her world of expression. Their conversations weren't always about launches or deadlines anymore. They were about meaning, memory, and imagination. Then came the moment that would quietly become a turning point, though few noticed at first. Elon attended a town hall in a small coal mining town in West Virginia, one deeply resistant to renewable energy and skeptical of coastal elites telling them how to live. Tesla had recently announced plans to build a solar farm nearby, sparking protests. Rather than send a PR team, Elon showed up in person. Alone. No cameras. No press. He asked to speak, not to present. And for 3 hours, he listened. The miners shared their fears. Of job loss, cultural erasure, being left behind in the name of progress. Elon didn't interrupt. When he finally spoke, he didn't offer stats or forecasts. He talked about his own fear, of losing what mattered while chasing what impressed. He promised to create a training center in the town, offering guaranteed jobs to locals for building and maintaining the solar infrastructure. He invited local leaders to join Tesla's design process. The room didn't erupt in applause. But hands were shaken. And something shifted. The story didn't make major headlines. But within months, enrollment at the training center exceeded expectations. The community began transforming, not just economically, but emotionally. They felt seen. And Elon? He felt something even deeper. A kind of quiet fulfillment he hadn't felt when Falcon 9 first landed or when Tesla hit its trillion-dollar valuation. It wasn't glory. It was grace. All of this fed into a new project Elon had been quietly incubating. Terra Nova, a foundation aimed at merging sustainable tech, education, and social equity into local solutions. It wasn't flashy. There were no live streams. But it became one of his proudest efforts. Through Terra Nova, former critics were now collaborators, including activists he had once sparred with online. Elon began mentoring young founders not just on scaling fast, but on building wisely. He urged them to ask hard questions early, about impact, about burnout, about legacy. He told them, "You'll build the tech. But if you don't build your soul along the way, it'll never mean what you think it will." These words, once unimaginable from the younger Elon, began to circulate in startup circles like gospel. He became a different kind of icon, not just the one who redefined cars, rockets, and AI, but the one who redefined what leadership could look like. There were still moments of friction. There were public missteps and criticisms. But something fundamental had changed. Elon no longer responded with defensiveness. He didn't flinch from accountability. And this authenticity created space for a richer, more complex kind of legacy. As the chapter of his life turned, it became clear that Elon Musk was no longer just an inventor of machines. He was becoming a builder of bridges, between industries, between communities, between the future and the present, between ambition and compassion. And perhaps most profoundly, between the person he used to be and the man he was still becoming. His story was far from over. But now, it had a different center. Not speed. Not conquest. Not spectacle. But purpose. And that purpose, rooted in growth and grace, would define everything that came next. By the time Elon Musk reached the midpoint of his new journey, he no longer measured success by stock prices or launch windows, but by something harder to quantify: alignment. The harmony between vision and action, between message and method, between ambition and empathy. It wasn't that he had abandoned his drive, far from it. The projects were still vast, still impossible by most standards. Starship was undergoing final tests for the first long-term Mars cargo flight. Tesla's autonomous vehicle network had rolled out in several major cities. Neuralink had completed successful clinical trials for memory restoration. And yet, none of these headlines defined him anymore. What was once the center of the Elon Musk universe, breakthrough, attention, dominance, had shifted outward, towards something more communal, more human. At Tesla headquarters in Austin, Elon initiated what he called Day Zero meetings. These were open forums with no hierarchy, no slide decks, and no PR filter. Employees from any division could bring ideas or concerns directly to the leadership table. The goal wasn't speed, it was truth. Elon believed that somewhere between the bottom line and the whiteboard was a conversation that too many companies avoided: why are we doing this? And who are we doing it for? In one such meeting, a junior engineer stood up and challenged the company's materials sourcing process, arguing it didn't fully account for the human cost in mining regions overseas. A few years ago, Elon might have brushed it off or delegated it down the chain. But now, he asked the engineer to join a task force to reevaluate the company's entire ethical supply chain. Within weeks, new partnerships were forged with sustainable mining cooperatives, and transparency dashboards were published for the public. It was a small revolution that came not from the top, but from a willingness to listen. Outside of his companies, Elon began hosting small, invitation-only retreats with thinkers from wildly different worlds: poets, monks, anthropologists, teachers. The idea was simple: if he wanted to build the future, he needed perspectives that didn't always speak in code or capital. He called them Horizon Sessions. There were no phones, no pitches. Just dialogue. Around fire pits and walking trails, these sessions covered the limits of AI, the ethics of space colonization, the spirituality of machines, the role of silence in a noisy age. Elon didn't dominate these talks. He absorbed them. He'd scribble notes furiously, pause to consider something a poet had said, or laugh when a monk pointed out the irony of searching for life on Mars when we so often ignore it next door. These conversations began to shape how he made decisions. The launches continued, but now they included cultural payloads: art, language, soil samples, even poems encoded in synthetic DNA. Elon's idea was that if humans ever left Earth permanently, we shouldn't just take our tools. We should take our soul. Back in the public eye, Musk's tone shifted noticeably. He still made jokes, still engaged online, but with more clarity of purpose. He started spotlighting other leaders, especially women and young technologists doing breakthrough work. He stepped out of the spotlight as often as he stepped into it, understanding that legacy wasn't built on domination, but on seeding greatness in others. Then came a health scare. A routine checkup turned into something more serious. Nothing terminal, but enough to remind him of mortality in a way numbers never could. For the first time in decades, Elon took 2 weeks completely off-grid. No staff, no screens, just a quiet place in the Pacific Northwest and a stack of books he'd been meaning to read since PayPal. He hiked alone, cooked his own meals, and wrote long letters to his children. Letters they might not need now, but might cherish someday. In those woods, he wasn't the richest man in the world. He was just a father, a thinker, a man facing the echo of his own life. When he returned, he didn't speak of the health scare publicly. Instead, he launched a new internal program across all his companies focused on whole human innovation, an initiative that integrated physical wellness, emotional intelligence, and ethical reflection into the daily culture of engineering. It wasn't a perk. It was a pillar. Some saw it as soft. Elon didn't care. He had seen too many brilliant people burn out, break down, or fade away before their time. If his companies were truly building the future, they had to care about the builders. Meanwhile, Terra Nova, the foundation he had quietly seeded, was growing rapidly. Its education branch launched a global mentorship program for underprivileged students interested in science and sustainability. Its energy branch funded microgrid projects in climate-vulnerable regions. And its ethical AI lab began publishing open-source frameworks designed to keep machine learning aligned with human dignity. Elon didn't run Terra Nova. He didn't even sit on its board. He had built it to outlast him. That was the point. He gave it his name, but not his control. And still, the press came. They asked the same old questions: are you still the richest? When's the Mars landing? What do you drive now? And Elon answered, sometimes playfully, sometimes sharply. But his favorite response, when asked how he measured success these days, was a quiet one: how many people I help sleep better at night. That's my net worth. One moment from this period would later become symbolic of this new Elon. He visited a high school in Detroit, not as part of a campaign, not with an entourage, just to talk. He sat in a folding chair in the gym and told students about failure, about loneliness, about being a kid who read science fiction to escape. One student asked him what he was most proud of. He thought for a moment, then said, that I learned how to say sorry. And mean it. The room fell silent. Not out of awe, but out of recognition. Because they saw not a titan, but a man. A man who had been to the edges of possibility and had come back with something most people forget to look for: peace. As the chapter drew to a close, Elon found himself on the balcony of a modest house he had built in South Texas, just miles from the SpaceX launch pad. It was a clear night. The stars shimmered. And in the distance, a quiet hum, Starship being readied for its next mission. He took a sip of coffee, not to stay awake, but to savor the warmth. A fox darted across the sand dunes. Somewhere, a satellite pinged a village into Wi-Fi existence. And nearby, his youngest child stirred in sleep. Elon watched the horizon, not for the next launch window, but for the quiet proof that the future was not something to be conquered, but something to be trusted, shaped slowly, and shared. Elon Musk had spent most of his life pushing outward, into industries, into orbit, into the future itself, but as he stepped deeper into this new season of his life, the push turned inward. Not in retreat, but in refinement. The mission hadn't changed, but the man leading it had. There was still work to be done, monumental and at times seemingly impossible work, but now it was infused with a strange and beautiful paradox: urgency slowed by wisdom. Elon began to consider legacy in a different light. It wasn't about being remembered as the man who launched the most rockets or sold the most electric cars. It was about being remembered for what he left behind in people, the minds he sparked, the voices he amplified, the systems he helped evolve towards something more just. Tesla was now under the operational guidance of a leadership team Elon had personally mentored for over a decade. They were younger, more diverse, and better suited to steer the company into its next phase without the gravitational pull of Elon's larger-than-life presence. He remained a guiding voice, but he deliberately stepped back from day-to-day oversight. SpaceX, on the other hand, was entering its most ambitious chapter yet. The first crewed mission to begin long-duration surface preparation on Mars had been greenlit. It wasn't colonization, not yet, but it was the beginning of real, physical infrastructure on another planet. Elon visited the Starbase launch site with his son, XAEA-12, walking through the hangars not as a CEO barking directives but as a father showing his child a dream made real. They stood in front of Starship, and Elon looked up with wonder, as he always had, but this time he asked his son what he saw. "It looks like a giant pencil," the boy said. Elon laughed and nodded, "Yeah. A pencil to write the next chapter of human history." His tone wasn't one of pride, it was reverence. Meanwhile, the social and ethical undercurrents he had once overlooked were now primary in his thinking. Neuralink was advancing rapidly, but its most profound success wasn't in flashy demonstrations, it was in restoring mobility to a stroke patient who had been unable to move for over a decade. The company published the breakthrough as open science, inviting international researchers to improve upon it. Musk pushed for this transparency, rejecting the old temptation to dominate the narrative. "Let the tech speak," he said. "Let the results heal." And they did. Thousands of new applications began to emerge from researchers inspired by Neuralink's base protocols, treatments for neurological disorders, educational tools for nonverbal children, even emotional mapping software to help those with PTSD reframe trauma. It was not without controversy, but this time, Elon welcomed the hard conversations. He hosted forums with ethicists, privacy advocates, and critics who had once dismissed the entire concept. He didn't always agree, but he always listened. A defining moment came when Elon returned to Joe Rogan's podcast for a third time. It wasn't hyped. It wasn't announced with fanfare. They sat across from each other in a room that felt more like a cabin than a studio. No whiskey. No jokes about flamethrowers. Just two men, a few years older, maybe wiser, talking. Joe leaned in halfway through and asked, "You ever think this whole thing, everything you built, everything you dreamed, might have just been your way of looking for peace?" Elon didn't answer right away. He rubbed his face, smiled softly, then said, "Maybe. But I think I was looking for meaning. And in the search, I found people. And in people, I found the peace." The episode went viral, but not because of spectacle. It went viral because it was real. Because it resonated. Because it felt like a man not arriving at a finish line, but finally walking at a pace that allowed others to walk with him. That's when something extraordinary happened. A movement began, not a fan base, not a cult of personality, but a mindset shift spreading through thousands of startups, classrooms, community labs. They called it the human future. It was based on three principles Elon had articulated in an impromptu speech at a Terra Nova student summit: ambition without ego, progress without destruction, and connection without borders. The speech wasn't polished. He fumbled his words. He paused often. But it didn't matter. It was the clearest he had ever been. Young entrepreneurs began building social tech ventures that prioritized mental health and local empowerment. Engineers adopted open-source ethics pledges. Cities that once rejected Tesla gigafactories asked for workshops instead, teaching local youth how to design clean tech on their own terms. Elon watched this quietly. He didn't post about it. He didn't claim it. But in moments of stillness, walking through the desert near his Starbase cabin or sitting with his youngest child as they read old sci-fi books, he knew this was it. This was what he had always meant but never fully said. That the future had to be human not just in benefit, but in spirit. That our greatest tools must always point inward before they point outward. The Mars mission was delayed by a solar storm, but Elon wasn't frustrated. He had learned that some things, like weather, or people, don't respond to force. They respond to patience, preparation, respect. He used the delay to bring together artists, architects, and philosophers to imagine not just what Martian infrastructure would look like, but what Martian culture could be. "What stories will we tell there?" he asked. "What mistakes from Earth must we leave behind?" These weren't PR stunts. They were soul work. And the answers they generated shaped the way future settlements were conceptualized, not as extensions of Earth's mistakes, but as reimaginings of what civilization could mean. Back on Earth, Elon surprised everyone by quietly funding a massive reforestation project in the Congo, an area historically ravaged by corporate extraction. He didn't attach his name. It only came to light because a local activist posted about it, thanking a weird guy from America who said he owed the planet a favor. That post became a symbol, a final puzzle piece falling into place. Elon wasn't just launching rockets anymore. He was planting roots. In the final scene of this chapter, he stood alone on the roof of Tesla's original Fremont factory, the place where it all began. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the metal and glass. Below, workers were heading home, not racing, not burned out, but walking slowly, talking to each other, smiling. Elon watched them for a long time. Then he looked up at the sky, where somewhere, one of his satellites was passing quietly above. He didn't wave. He didn't post. He just stood there, taking it all in. And in that stillness, he felt something rare for someone who had lived at the speed of thought. He felt present. Not in the future. Not in a timeline or tweet. Just here. Just now. And that was enough. As Elon Musk stepped into what many would call the twilight of a legacy, he found himself less preoccupied with timelines and more drawn to moments. Not the explosive ones, the launches, the unveilings, the worldwide press cycles, but the ones no camera crew ever caught, a quiet lunch with a high school robotics team, a solitary walk through the South Texas dunes, a handwritten thank you note from a paraplegic man now walking with the help of Neuralink. These moments lingered, not because they were grand, but because they were true. They were the echoes of intention catching up with action. Elon began spending more time with teachers. Not professors or think tank scholars, but public school teachers, often underpaid and overworked, the kind who shaped young minds without applause. He invited them to his factories, sat in on their classrooms, asked what they needed. It wasn't a PR move. There were no photographers. He told them, "You are the engineers of humanity's operating system. If we're upgrading the hardware, we better protect the programmers." Out of these visits came the EduNova initiative, a Musk-funded project that partnered with underserved schools to provide advanced STEM tools and human-centered design curriculums, but only if the schools led the design. Elon insisted that innovation without dignity was just disruption in disguise. The model caught on. Rural schools in Mississippi developed clean water projects using solar-powered filtration kits from EduNova. An all-girls school in Detroit built a drone fleet for wildlife monitoring. A Navajo high school in New Mexico reverse-engineered a solar home battery pack to power a reservation clinic. Elon visited each site quietly. No suits. No speeches. Just listening. It became a rhythm. Learn. Build. Listen. Repeat. The world, however, still expected him to be the old Elon from time to time. A viral tweet here. A polarizing interview there. But those moments began to feel like echoes from a former life, as if the persona had outlived the person. One such incident, an out-of-context quote about AI governance, went viral, reigniting debates about his intentions. He watched the discourse unfold, then posted just one sentence in response: "Not all problems are code." It confused some, inspired others. But for those paying attention, it marked a shift. He wasn't explaining himself anymore. He was inviting the world to think harder. That summer, he was invited to deliver the commencement address at MIT. The world expected fireworks. He gave them a whisper. No slides, no humor, no grand proclamations. Just a story. About the first time he felt truly afraid, not on a launch pad, but in a hospital room when his newborn child stopped breathing for 12 seconds. In that moment, he said, no data, no algorithm, no backup plan mattered. Only love. Only being there. And that's when I understood, all this technology, all this progress, it's just scaffolding around the only thing that matters. Life. All of it. The silence in the auditorium wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Even the harshest critics had to pause. He walked off stage and didn't wait for applause. He simply shook hands with a few graduates and left. In the months that followed, a noticeable shift occurred. Elon started giving away ownership stakes, not just in charitable arms like Terra Nova, but in core ventures. He transferred sizable portions of Neuralink and Boring Company equity into public benefit trusts. He capped executive salaries, including his own, tying compensation to public health metrics and education outcomes. Wall Street was baffled. Tech analysts called it unprecedented. But Elon, when asked why, just said, no one owns the future. We only borrow it. Behind the scenes, he began mentoring a group of young thinkers, some engineers, some poets, one former refugee who had taught herself robotics using scrap metal and a cracked tablet. These weren't protégés in the traditional sense. He wasn't grooming replacements. He was planting something. Not a legacy, but a lineage. Each of them was building something different: clean tech for slums, AI for rural farmers, space education for orphan children. Elon didn't ask for credit. He offered silence, room to grow. His joy came in hearing their updates, watching their ideas take flight, sometimes literally. SpaceX, meanwhile, was approaching its most symbolic mission yet, not the first humans on Mars, but something more poetic. Elon called it Project Arkansas. The goal wasn't colonization. It was connection. The ship would carry a curated collection of Earth's cultural treasures: songs, languages, recipes, seeds, letters, sculptures, myths, all encoded and etched to withstand deep space travel. It would land on Mars not as a flag, but as a gift. It's not about bringing Earth to Mars, he said. It's about reminding Mars we were here, and we cared. The project was ridiculed by some. A publicity stunt, they claimed. But Elon didn't respond. He didn't need to. The idea wasn't for the critics. It was for the next mind, the next soul, the next child looking up at the stars. And then, one quiet evening, an unexpected call came in. A nurse from a children's hospital in Sao Paulo had been running a late shift. A solar battery from a Tesla microgrid had kicked in during a blackout, saving a neonatal wing. The nurse left a voicemail. She didn't say thank you. She just said, they lived. Elon listened to that message again and again. It didn't go viral. It wasn't posted. But he saved it. He shared it only once, with his son. This, he said, this is why. The man who had once chased Mars now found his gravity in Earth's smallest stories. And yet, even as he grew quieter, his influence deepened. The human future ethos began reshaping global policy discussions. Nations adopted ethical frameworks inspired by his foundation's work. Universities changed their curriculum to reflect a more holistic view of engineering. Even rival tech CEOs began opening their cultures, citing Elon's transformation as proof that empathy and excellence weren't opposites. A journalist finally asked him directly, "Do you think you've changed the world?" Elon shook his head. "No. I think I stopped trying to own the change. I just gave it space." And that was the point. Not the rockets, not the cars, not the brain interfaces. The real innovation was this: the realization that all invention is incomplete without compassion. That the greatest leap wasn't between planets, but between people. That the future worth building was one where no one had to choose between greatness and grace. And as Elon watched Project Ark rise into the sky, not as a product but as a prayer, he smiled, not because he had won, but because he had learned. That love, when embedded into design, when coded into action, when launched with intention, is the only technology that never needs an update. The world had changed so subtly around Elon Musk that most people didn't realize it until they stopped to look. His name was still headline-worthy, but now it was linked less to controversy and more to transformation. He had not disappeared from public life, far from it, but the way he showed up was different. His appearances were quieter, his interviews more reflective, and his energy no longer burned hot like a wildfire but warm like a campfire, drawing people closer instead of pushing them away. It was in this space that Elon began a new endeavor, not a company, not a product launch, but a story. It started with a journal, something he had avoided for most of his life. Writing had always felt too slow, too messy, too vulnerable. But now, in the calm space between projects, he found comfort in putting pen to paper, not to strategize, but to reflect. Each entry began the same way: what did I learn today? What began as a private habit soon evolved into a larger idea. Elon decided to publish his reflections, not as a memoir, but as a living document, a series of thoughts and questions rather than answers. He called it Field Notes from the Future. The writing was raw, unfiltered, often meandering. One entry would explore the ethics of terraforming Mars, and the next would delve into the regrets of missing his children's birthdays during SpaceX's crunch years. People didn't expect it. They expected confidence, certainty, genius. What they got was honesty, vulnerability, humanity. And they responded. Field Notes became a touchstone for a new generation of builders who no longer saw ambition and softness as mutually exclusive. University classes dissected it. Book clubs read it aloud. Parents gave it to their children. But most importantly, it inspired others to write their own. Across the world, people began journaling their own field notes as engineers, teachers, nurses, coders, and caregivers. Elon watched this quietly, humbled. He realized that his greatest invention might not be any machine, but a mindset, a model for thinking, feeling, and growing through uncertainty. Around this time, SpaceX reached a historic milestone: the first permanent Martian habitat was completed. It wasn't glamorous, a set of domes and tunnels, part habitat, part lab, but it worked. And the message was sent back to Earth in a simple transmission: we made it. Together. Elon didn't attend the launch. He didn't need to. He watched it from his cabin in Texas, sitting with his youngest son wrapped in a blanket beside him, the fire crackling softly. The moment was quiet, but monumental. A dream that had begun in a boy's imagination had become a shared reality. But he wasn't done dreaming. That same year, he launched the Listening Project. It wasn't tech-based at all, it was a global effort to record oral histories from elders in underrepresented communities. Elon had begun to understand that the most valuable data we ignore isn't digital, it's lived. Stories passed down, not typed out. He wanted to preserve them before they disappeared. We digitize everything, he wrote, but we forget the most human OS, memory. The project grew rapidly, collecting tens of thousands of stories, from Maasai grandmothers in Kenya to Appalachian coal miners to war survivors in Ukraine. AI helped sort and translate them, but the heart of the work was human volunteers, many of them inspired by Elon's new approach. They didn't just record. They listened. And in listening, they learned. Meanwhile, Neuralink's newest advancement allowed a quadriplegic artist to control a digital canvas with her thoughts. The painting she created was auctioned to fund surgeries for others. She named it Gravity and Grace. When asked what inspired the name, she said, "Because I can finally feel weight and beauty again." Elon attended the gallery quietly, tears in his eyes as he stood before the painting. He asked to buy it but was refused. "It already belongs to the world," she said. He smiled and nodded. "That's exactly right." Even in moments of grief, Elon found new depth. When a longtime Tesla technician passed unexpectedly, Elon flew out for the memorial and spent hours with the family, not out of obligation, but out of love. He spoke about the time the technician had caught a critical flaw in a battery prototype that saved weeks of work. That one fix, Elon said, probably prevented a recall. He saved us. And no one knew it. After the memorial, he set up a scholarship fund in the technician's name for kids interested in electrical engineering. No press release. No corporate fanfare. Just a letter sent to the family, "Thank you for sharing his light with us." That light, shared, not hoarded, became a guiding principle for Elon in his 60s. He started hosting community nights at Starbase, inviting local families, students, and teachers to explore the facility, ask questions, and even pitch ideas. He sat on folding chairs and drank lemonade. He laughed with kids who asked if Mars had pizza yet. He answered every question, no matter how small. It became a ritual. And over time, it became legend. That Elon Musk, the man who once stood alone against the impossible, now stood with others, building a different kind of future. One not just driven by innovation, but shaped by invitation. And then, on a quiet Thursday morning, something unexpected happened. Elon received a letter from an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years, a scientist he'd clashed with over AI ethics. The letter was short. It simply said, "You were right to slow down. Thank you for making room for the rest of us." Elon read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in the back of his journal, and walked outside. The Texas sky was wide and blue. Starlink satellites blinked quietly overhead. Somewhere, a child was learning coding through Terra Nova's open platform. Somewhere else, a farmer was using solar tools funded by EduNova. Somewhere far, far away, Martian settlers were writing their own field notes on red soil. Elon smiled. Not the smirk of a disruptor, but the soft smile of a man who had disrupted himself. He looked toward the horizon, not to chase it, but to honor it. Because now he understood, the future isn't a destination. It's a dialogue. And the best thing he could do was keep listening. It began with a whisper, like most revolutions do, not the kind with banners or battles, but a quieter upheaval that starts in the heart and spreads through action. Elon Musk, once the poster child of relentless ambition and iron-willed disruption, had shifted so dramatically that people no longer talked about his products first. They talked about his principles. Not because he gave speeches or authored manifestos, but because he lived them, incrementally, imperfectly, and visibly. By the time his 60th birthday came around, there was no gala, no big celebration. Instead, Elon spent the day at a small robotics camp in rural Arkansas, surrounded by middle schoolers building Mars rover models from recycled parts. He wore a t-shirt with the words, "Ask me something weird," on it, and by lunch, he was sitting cross-legged on the floor explaining orbital physics using crackers and soda cans. One girl asked him what the most important number in the universe was. He didn't hesitate. 1, he said. Because if even one life improves from your work, it matters. Everything scales from that. The staff didn't even know he was coming. He'd found the camp through an old blog post and showed up quietly, without a camera crew or PR handler. That moment, captured only on a teacher's cracked phone, would go on to be shared not because it was viral, but because it was true. A few weeks later, he sat down with a young startup founder, barely out of college, whose AI company had built a model designed to detect loneliness in senior citizens through voice pattern recognition. Elon didn't ask for a demo. Instead, he asked, "Who helped you build it?" The founder listed mentors, a grandmother, and a retired speech therapist. Elon just nodded and said, "Good. Remember them when the money shows up. And remember the people you're trying to reach when it doesn't." The startup would go on to become a case study in responsible tech, profitable, but rooted in care. The founder later credited that conversation as a turning point. Not because Elon gave strategy, but because he gave permission to care more than the market demanded. Meanwhile, Project Ark had entered its final phase. The Earth-to-Mars cultural capsule had landed safely, and the settlers had begun exploring its contents. Photos came back of Martians, still Earthborn, but already changed, reading poems by Maya Angelou under artificial light, planting heirloom seeds in Martian soil, and singing lullabies in Tagalog, Swahili, and Navajo. It was a kind of miracle. Not a conquest, but a communion. Elon looked at those images with tears in his eyes. Not because it had worked, but because it had meant something. "We didn't just bring science," he wrote in his journal that night. "We brought soul." Closer to home, his foundations had quietly grown into global ecosystems. Terra Nova's climate resilience labs were now operating in 20 countries, training local scientists to monitor, adapt, and restore ecosystems without waiting for top-down solutions. EduNova had launched a full curriculum in more than 1,200 under-resourced schools, not just teaching coding and engineering but philosophy, ethics, storytelling, and collaborative design. The Human Future Program, once considered an idealistic side project, was now being adopted by city planners in Singapore, Oslo, and parts of California as a framework for integrating innovation into public policy without losing human dignity. It was messy work, slow and deeply complex. But it was working. Elon's role in all this wasn't managerial anymore. It was relational. He mentored, asked questions, showed up to obscure prototype fairs in places the media never followed. He sat in village meetings in Ghana, watched marine biologists tag sea turtles in Indonesia, and discussed lunar literacy programs with a woman in rural China who had translated the Martian into her local dialect using AI and hand-annotated pages. When asked why he kept traveling, he shrugged and said, "To remind myself that the world doesn't revolve around Silicon Valley, or Mars." It wasn't performative humility. It was practiced. Earned. Elon had faced criticism early in his career for being too brash, too controlling, too dismissive of nuance. But now, when faced with conflict or contradiction, he leaned in. Not to defend, but to understand. At a panel on AI and human rights, when challenged on past decisions, he responded not with justification but reflection, "I used to think speed was everything. Now I think direction is." That line became a kind of compass for the next wave of entrepreneurs and engineers. Speed is easy. Direction takes courage. One of his most profound gestures came during a quiet autumn day in South Africa. Elon returned to the street where he'd spent part of his childhood, walking slowly, absorbing not just the memories but the silences. He met with local youth organizations, helped fund a renewable energy grid for a township clinic, and then visited a school where his childhood math teacher had once taught. He placed a single plaque on a rebuilt classroom wall. It read, "To the ones who saw light before it became laser-focused." The same day, a viral photo emerged of Elon sitting in a folding chair under a tree, reading aloud from Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot to a group of barefoot children. He wasn't trying to inspire. He was trying to pass something on. Back in Texas, his daily routine remained simple. Morning walks. Long calls with global collaborators. A lunch break where he read printed letters from students around the world, hundreds came in weekly. He answered as many as he could by hand. One child in Argentina asked him, "Do you ever get scared that people will forget you?" Elon wrote back, "If they remember the work, that's enough. If they remember to be kind, that's everything." That reply was framed in the child's classroom. As for SpaceX, it continued its growth, but with an emphasis on sustainability, partnership, and planetary stewardship. The rockets were cleaner. The launches quieter. The debris plans tighter. Elon even helped launch an initiative to clean up decades of orbital junk, partnering with agencies he had once competed against. "We filled the sky chasing dreams," he said. "Now let's clear it so others can dream too." The tech world was still filled with hype and chaos, but Elon had become a kind of calm North Star, less the disruptor and more the anchor. People who once tried to emulate his old style, intensity without empathy, now began modeling his new approach, rigor with reflection, boldness with balance. In one of his final public interviews that year, a journalist asked what he wished he'd known earlier in life. Elon paused, looked at the camera, and said, that being the smartest person in the room doesn't matter if you're not also the kindest. The clip was watched by over 80 million people. Not because it was provocative, but because it was true. His children were older now. Some had followed him into science, others into music, writing, teaching. He didn't push them. He just listened. Every Sunday, they video called, sometimes to talk about new ideas, sometimes just to sit quietly together. Elon told them often, do your work. But never forget to feel. And when the first Martian-born child sent back a message to Earth, a simple video clip of her singing a lullaby under a copper sky, Elon watched it from his Texas porch with one hand on his heart. He turned to no one in particular and whispered, that's it. That's why. The story of Elon Musk wasn't over. But it had become something else, less a biography, more a mirror. A story not of a man who changed the world through machines, but of a man who changed the way we think about change itself. Slowly. Softly. Like a whisper that becomes a wave. The road ahead was quieter now. Not in the sense of less ambition or reduced activity, those were still there, humming like low voltage beneath everything Elon Musk touched, but in the clarity that comes when noise has given way to purpose. By now, the world had begun adjusting to the idea of Elon not as a disruptor, but as a steward. And stewardship, he believed, required more listening than leading, more planting than pushing. His calendar had no titles or department meetings anymore. It was filled instead with visits, intentional, quiet visits to people and places far from the boardrooms and stages where he'd once made headlines. He spent time at remote eco-villages in Mongolia where solar microgrids powered schools and homes. He attended listening circles with indigenous communities in Alaska to learn how ancient land stewardship practices could teach modern sustainability. He even spent a week in complete silence at a Buddhist monastery in Kyoto. When asked later what he took from it, he smiled and said, "My mind has a lot of tabs open. That week, I finally closed a few." Meanwhile, the world was evolving in strange, beautiful ways. Electric vehicle adoption had become the norm, with entire cities phasing out combustion engines. Space travel had stabilized into routine missions, no longer seen as novelty but as infrastructure. Neuralink had been split into two branches. One focused strictly on therapeutic applications and the other governed by an independent ethics board composed of neurologists, disability advocates, and philosophers. Elon supported the split fully. No one should own minds, he said. Only offer help to free them. What once would have sparked headlines as an abdication of control was now seen for what it was, wisdom. He understood that legacy, if held too tightly, chokes innovation. So he opened his hands and let others take flight. But he didn't disappear. He began curating a new kind of conference, not for product launches or investor showcases, but for questions. It was called the Curiosity Summit. No panels, no keynotes. Just gatherings of people from different fields, midwives, data scientists, poets, coders, farmers, tasked with one thing: ask better questions. The first summit's central theme was, what don't we know that we should already? Elon didn't speak at all until the last hour. And even then, he didn't offer answers. He offered more questions. What if the next great leap isn't out there, he said, but deeper in here? Tapping his chest. The summit ended with no fanfare. Just a quiet commitment: each participant would take one unanswered question home and live into it for a year. Some called it strange. Others called it genius. Elon called it necessary. Meanwhile, in the heart of Africa, a group of teenagers working from an open-source EduNova lab designed a new form of low-cost soil sensor using repurposed smartphone components. Their project, originally submitted to a local science fair, was picked up by agricultural scientists across the global south and implemented at scale. When reporters asked where they got the idea, they credited the field notes model Elon had published years earlier. One boy said, "He told us to start small, stay close, and make sure our tech listens before it talks." That quote went viral. Not because of celebrity, but because it captured a principle the world was thirsty for. Elon, when he read it, smiled and said, "They get it." He had started releasing annual letters to the future, addressed not to investors or followers, but to humanity. These weren't policy documents or predictions. They were reflections. The 2030 letter opened with, "What will we wish we'd paid attention to, once it's gone?" He wrote about silence, about childhood laughter, about old-growth forests and coral reefs and kindness in customer service lines. He encouraged everyone to write their own letters. And millions did. It became a ritual. Every January 1st, people all over the world wrote letters to their future selves and the world they hoped to help build. This shift, from broadcasting vision to catalyzing it, was Elon's quiet revolution. He had gone from launching rockets to launching responsibility. And people followed, not because of charisma, but because of clarity. His family had grown too. He spent more time with his children now, often traveling with them to places where his name meant nothing. He took them camping in Patagonia, walking in silence beneath the stars. They asked questions he had no answers to. He no longer feared that. "I don't know," he'd say. "Let's wonder together." One of his daughters, now a young adult, had become an environmental educator. She once introduced him at a local event, not as Elon Musk, but simply as my dad, who taught me to ask big questions and admit when he's wrong. It brought him to tears. He kept a printed copy of that introduction on his desk. SpaceX, now mostly run by the next generation of engineers, prepared its first joint project with Mars settlers, a memory capsule filled with stories collected from every country on Earth. The settlers requested stories, not specs. They wanted bedtime tales, jokes, songs, arguments, awkward teenage memories, anything that felt real. Elon supported it wholeheartedly. "The future deserves our whole selves," he said. "Not just the highlights." When the capsule launched, it didn't make headlines. But the stories did. Schools began story exchange programs. Museums created future memory exhibits. People began thinking differently about what they'd leave behind. And then, one morning, something happened that changed everything again. A solar flare damaged part of the Earth's satellite communications network, threatening a blackout across multiple continents. While governments scrambled, Starlink's mesh system adapted in real time, rerouting bandwidth, keeping hospitals, emergency services, and even classrooms online. Elon made no public statement. But he stayed up for 36 hours, working with engineers remotely, helping triage connections where they were needed most. When the crisis ended, people found out only because a nurse in Nairobi posted, "We delivered 3 babies by satellite light. Thank you, whoever kept us online." That became the story. Not the tech. Maybe we just need to keep it together while others do. His team took it to heart. Initiatives became more collaborative. Patents were released into the public domain. Partnerships were prioritized over dominance. The culture had changed, not overnight, but steadily, seeded by years of intentional modeling. One day, during a rare solo walk through the California coast, Elon stopped and looked at the ocean. Not as a resource. Not as a metaphor. Just as it was. Wild, indifferent, and beautiful. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, "The waves don't care who I am. But they'll carry anything I let go of." He tore the page out, folded it, and placed it in a tide pool. The paper melted into salt and water and stone. And then he walked on. The year Elon Musk turned 65, something quietly monumental happened. For the first time since he'd launched his first startup decades ago, he spent an entire month offline. No emails, no updates, no signal. Just a remote island off the coast of British Columbia, a rented cabin, a stack of paper books, and the soft sounds of tide and wind. People speculated he'd disappeared for good. The markets twitched, pundits analyzed, and a handful of conspiracies bloomed like algae in stagnant corners of the internet. But Elon wasn't gone. He was listening. Not to data, but to himself. It was during those 4 weeks that he found what he later called the center of the storm, a still place inside him where ambition no longer ran the show, where doing less actually revealed more. He didn't return with plans or blueprints. He returned with a question. What is the softest thing I can do with the biggest ripple? That question became his next, and perhaps final, project, RippleWorks. It wasn't a product or a platform. It was a philosophy, built around identifying invisible systems of care that quietly held society together: public libraries, hospice volunteers, food pantry organizers, after-school tutors. And reinforcing them not with money alone, but with dignity, amplification, and innovation. The idea was simple: use technological insight to support the people who make life livable, not just survivable. RippleWorks funded community-led projects with no intention of scale, only depth. Elon visited a small program in Vermont where high school students repaired old laptops for seniors. He sat beside a teenager named Matteo and learned how he'd taught himself basic coding to build custom interfaces for users with arthritis. Elon asked if he could help. Matteo said yes, and together they spent 3 afternoons prototyping a simplified OS called GentleTech. Elon didn't add his name. Matteo was listed as the lead developer. A month later, GentleTech was adopted by over 40 senior centers across North America. Elon received a hand-drawn thank you card from a 92-year-old woman in Manitoba who said she'd used it to video call her granddaughter for the first time. He pinned the card to the wall of his workshop. In Kenya, he partnered with a local midwife collective to design solar-powered prenatal care vans equipped with remote ultrasound devices. In Detroit, he worked with a barbershop that doubled as a literacy hub to develop an AI-powered audio library tailored to men who'd never felt welcome in traditional classrooms. Every project was small by corporate standards. But to the people involved, they weren't small at all. They were lifelines. When asked why he was focused on such low-tech work after decades of innovation, Elon said, "Because high-tech without heart is just noise. I'm interested in signal now." Meanwhile, the world kept spinning. Mars began hosting seasonal scientific retreats. Cities powered by decentralized clean grids became the norm. A generation raised on field notes and curiosity summits stepped into leadership roles. They didn't just ask what was possible, they asked what was kind. Elon's legacy no longer belonged to factories or patents. It lived in the invisible architectures of thought and care that had slowly shaped the world around him. But he never claimed credit. When someone referred to RippleWorks as Musk's latest innovation, he gently corrected them: "It's not mine. I'm just part of it." One fall evening, he met with a group of hospice nurses who'd created a digital storytelling platform for the dying to leave messages for loved ones. Elon sat silently through their presentation. At the end, he said only, "Thank you. You're doing the hardest, most sacred work on earth." He then donated a portion of his art collection to fund their expansion, not through auction, but by gifting it directly to community centers. The only condition was that each piece be displayed with a question, not a plaque. One sculpture bore the words, "What does it mean to be remembered well?" That question lingered with Elon. Not out of vanity, but out of reverence. He began compiling a final edition of Field Notes from the Future. This time called Field Notes from the Present. It was filled not with predictions, but observations. Moments he didn't want to forget. A child's laughter in 0G. A blind man tracing the surface of a Tesla Roadster and calling it liquid thunder. A schoolteacher in Bangladesh who used recycled battery cells to light her classroom and said, "When children can see, they can dream." The notes were handwritten. Messy. Human. He didn't edit them. He just shared them, one page at a time, on a free, decentralized web archive. Readers could contribute their own. And they did. Stories poured in from every corner of the world. Some were mundane. Some were transcendent. All were real. Elon read them late into the night, often in silence, occasionally smiling, sometimes crying. One day, he came across a submission from a young engineer in Turkey who had been orphaned in an earthquake and gone on to design quake-resistant housing using principles she'd reverse-engineered from Tesla battery containment units. Her message to Elon was simple: "You taught me that failure wasn't the end. It was a door. I walked through it. Thank you for leaving it open." Elon forwarded that message to his daughter with a note: "This is the work." She wrote back, "I know, Dad. I see it now." As time passed, Elon's public presence faded naturally. Not out of secrecy, but by design. He showed up in places that mattered, but no longer clung to the spotlight. People said he'd mellowed. But those closest to him knew better. He hadn't mellowed. He had distilled. He once told a young journalist, "I used to want to build everything. Now I want to build the things that help others build themselves." One of his last major public engagements was an invitation to speak at the United Nations. Not about technology, but about listening. His address was unlike anything they'd expected. No slides. No statistics. Just a story. About a janitor he'd met at a hospital who used to be an engineer but gave it up to care for his dying wife. Elon spoke of how that man had said, "Cleaning this floor keeps people safe. That's all the invention I need." The room was silent. Elon concluded, "Progress isn't the absence of struggle. It's the presence of care." That line was etched onto a stone outside the UN building 2 years later. Back at his workshop in Texas, Elon spent most of his time tinkering with tools, answering student emails, and walking the hills. He taught himself how to carve wood. He built birdhouses and left them in public parks with notes that read, "Please leave this as you found it, or make it better." Occasionally, he still got letters asking, "What's next?" He would write back, "You're next." It wasn't a deflection. It was an invitation. He had become the ripple. Not the splash. It was the quiet that struck people first, the kind of quiet that didn't feel like absence but like reverence. Elon Musk had stepped further out of the public eye, not in retreat, but in deliberate removal, like an artist putting down the brush after the final stroke. There was no official announcement, no orchestrated farewell. Just a gradual vanishing from headlines, interviews, and stages, as though the man who had once been everywhere now chose to be exactly nowhere and fully present at once. He'd moved to a modest home near the New Mexico border, a passive solar adobe structure built into the earth, surrounded by cottonwoods and stars. Visitors were rare and invited intentionally. There were no guards, no assistants, no self-driving gates. Those who came found Elon most often in the garden, hands in soil, or in his modest workshop assembling things that didn't need inventing: bird feeders, simple toys, wind chimes tuned to Martian frequencies. He didn't speak of timelines or launch windows anymore. He spoke of seasons, of the way a hawk's shadow sweeps across gravel, or how dew settles on aluminum in the early hours. People adjusted. The world had moved on technologically, his companies now independently run by the people he'd mentored, many of whom said they felt more like stewards than CEOs. Tesla had transitioned to a circular manufacturing economy, allowing customers to return vehicles for full remanufacturing and reuse. SpaceX had turned its attention to deep space bioviability and ethical colonization, guided by advisory councils that Elon had helped assemble years earlier. Starlink became an international cooperative, offering free baseline internet to every school, library, and clinic globally. Neuralink, now operating under entirely public health-aligned frameworks, had released its cognitive therapy interface open source. Elon no longer intervened. He observed, occasionally consulted when asked, and otherwise let go. Letting go had become his final innovation. It was around this time that a young filmmaker named Lila Ramos requested an interview with him, not to talk about rockets or riches, but about silence, about why he had stepped away. Elon declined at first. Then a month later, she received a package. Inside was a simple audio recorder and a note that read, "Ask your questions. I'll answer them in time." Over the next year, she sent him one question every week. No deadlines. No expectations. And slowly, the tapes came back. His voice, sometimes reflective, sometimes raw, always quiet. "What do you regret?" she asked once. His reply, "I regret thinking speed was virtue. Sometimes, I miss things by racing toward the future instead of feeling the present." Another question, "What changed you?" His answer, "Holding my son while he slept. Watching the world burn and realizing I didn't want to be the one holding the match, even if I called it progress." Lila compiled the recordings into a film not of Elon Musk the icon, but Elon Musk the person, flawed, evolving, strangely tender. It was released under a Creative Commons license titled The Quiet Engine. In it, he spoke of losing friends, of learning to apologize, of rebuilding relationships with his children one phone call at a time. One moment showed him watching footage of the Martian settlers planting a forest of earth-seeded trees beneath the protection of biodomes. He was crying, whispering, "That shouldn't have worked." And yet, there it is. The film won no awards but spread widely, becoming something closer to a shared meditation than a documentary. In classrooms, therapists' offices, and leadership seminars, people played his voice and asked themselves, what does it mean to change and still be you? Meanwhile, in that Adobe home, Elon kept writing. His final book wasn't about space or AI. It was about caregiving. Titled The Second Curve, it explored what it meant to build not out of scarcity or dominance, but out of maturity, reverence, and love. He spoke of projects that aged like people, gaining complexity, wisdom, and sometimes requiring retirement. He used tree metaphors. He talked about root systems and compost. "What's discarded," he wrote, "still feeds the future." The book was quietly published online for free. People downloaded it by the millions. Not for hype, but for nourishment. Elon's personal days followed rhythms most would find ordinary. He grew herbs. He answered letters from high school science students. He took slow walks in the high desert. He learned to play the flute. Once, when a local teacher brought her class for a visit, Elon sat with them beneath a juniper tree and asked, "What's something real that doesn't need electricity?" One child answered, "Kindness." Elon nodded and gave her a wooden box he'd carved himself. Inside was a tiny model of the Tesla Roadster she'd drawn in a letter months before. The only time he spoke publicly that year was via a single essay published in a peer-reviewed environmental journal. It was titled, "Stewardship in an Age of Scale." In it, Elon argued that the next major innovation wasn't going to come from machines or markets, but from meaning, from our ability to measure success not in GDP or downloads but in how well we preserved dignity at every level of progress. "If the future forgets the face of the present," he wrote, "we have failed." The essay was cited by urban planners, spiritual leaders, climate scientists, and even artists. It was, in a strange way, a global permission slip to slow down. To rethink. To rehumanize. Elon never attended the conference panels that discussed it. He was out walking that day. The final year of his active work on Earth was filled with rituals more than launches. He wrote personal reflections for each of his children to be opened at future milestones, weddings, births, losses. He recorded lullabies sung in different languages. He designed a game for kids called Build Gently, where players gained points by cooperation, restoration, and care, rather than conquest. It became quietly popular in classrooms and family circles, a counter to the usual games of domination. And then, just as quietly as he had arrived, Elon prepared to leave, not the world, but the work. He gathered the leaders of each of his former organizations for a retreat in Iceland, where no agenda was set. They sat in silence for the first full morning. Then each took turns naming something they feared and something they hoped. Elon said, "I fear forgetting. I hope for remembering." That retreat ended with a shared agreement, to meet again every 5 years, not to plan, but to reflect. The world didn't stop spinning. The headlines moved on. But ripples continued. A girl in Vietnam used open-source Tesla code to invent a solar irrigation system that saved her village. A teenager in Uruguay built a community AI librarian using open Neuralink models. A Martian settler wrote a poem that ended, "We were carried here not by rockets but by dreams passed gently hand to hand." Elon read it under starlight and whispered, "Yes. That's the truth." And so, the story of Elon Musk moved quietly toward conclusion, not in failure, not in conquest, but in handoff. The baton passed not to one, but to many. The question passed not with pressure, but with grace. And the future, long feared, now felt a little softer. A little more human. A little more ours. The unexpected happened on a chilly spring morning in Silicon Valley when a modest, handwritten envelope arrived at the offices of a nonprofit that worked to provide clean water in underserved communities. Inside was a letter from Elon Musk, addressed simply, "To those who carry the future." The letter was unassuming, no signature in bold or official seal, just a message that carried the weight of years lived in pursuit of impossible dreams. It spoke of humility, responsibility, and the interconnectedness of human progress. It acknowledged failures, celebrated small victories, and emphasized one truth above all: no technology, no innovation, no rocket can replace the simple act of listening. That letter sparked a movement. Volunteers, engineers, artists, and leaders across disciplines began to form what became known as the Listening Network, an initiative inspired by Elon's call to focus on empathy as the engine of change. It wasn't funded by venture capital or governments but by a patchwork of donations, volunteer time, and sheer belief in something bigger than profit. The Listening Network aimed to rebuild trust in communities fractured by decades of neglect and rapid change. It started with pilot projects, mobile listening stations in refugee camps where displaced families could tell their stories and receive support, neighborhood circles in urban deserts where youth voiced hopes and frustrations without judgment, and virtual reality spaces where people could step into the lives of others to experience their realities firsthand. Elon quietly advised, never leading, always supporting. His own role had evolved into that of a facilitator and elder, someone who reminded the world that technology's highest calling was to serve humanity's deepest needs. One such project unfolded in Flint, Michigan, where the water crisis had left scars deeper than pipes. The Listening Network collaborated with local activists to create an augmented reality app that mapped residents' experiences with contaminated water, overlaying personal narratives atop city streets. Users could point their phones and hear stories of loss, resilience, and hope from neighbors, turning forgotten corners into living memorials and calls to action. The app inspired policymakers, journalists, and engineers to see the crisis not just as infrastructure failure but as a human story demanding compassion and justice. Meanwhile, Elon remained intensely engaged in his personal projects. He had taken up beekeeping, fascinated by the social structure of hives and the delicate balance of ecosystems. Friends joked that he was now the beekeeper of Mars, tending to colonies of native and Earth-introduced bees in greenhouses on both planets. But Elon insisted it was more than a hobby, it was a metaphor for society's interconnectedness. His bees taught him patience, cooperation, and the necessity of nurturing the smallest elements for the health of the whole. At a global conference on climate resilience, Elon gave a rare keynote. Instead of charts or forecasts, he shared a simple story, a beekeeper's daughter who had lost her voice and found it again through song, taught by the hum of bees. The room was silent, every eye fixed. If we lose the small, the sacred, the soft, Elon said, we lose everything. Outside of these events, Elon's days were filled with quiet mentorship. He opened his home to young changemakers, inviting them to share failures as openly as successes. One afternoon, a teenage programmer from Detroit asked him, "How do you keep going when the world feels broken?" Elon smiled and replied, "Because it is broken. That's why we build. Not to fix it in one shot, but to keep building, one small piece, one connection, one act of care at a time." That became a mantra within the listening network, reminding participants that progress wasn't a single leap but an endless chain of small, deliberate steps. Social scientists, technologists, and artists began to document the movement's impact. They found that communities involved reported not just improved material conditions, but increased feelings of belonging and hope. A new paradigm emerged, one that valued listening as a form of innovation and connection as a form of infrastructure. Elon's influence spread quietly into classrooms, community centers, and even corporate boardrooms. He was invited to speak to CEOs about leading with listening, and appeared in podcasts alongside activists and spiritual leaders. Every time, he emphasized humility over hubris, patience over speed, and empathy over efficiency. One of the most profound moments came when Elon was invited to a healing circle with indigenous elders in the Pacific Northwest. They shared stories of land, loss, and revival. Elon listened without interruption for hours, humbled by the weight of history and the strength of survival. At the circle's close, one elder spoke to him, "You carry great power. Use it like the river, carve gently, nourish deeply." Elon took those words to heart. He began to shift his company's missions even further, ensuring that every project considered not just innovation but restoration, repairing damaged ecosystems, cultures, and trust. When a severe wildfire threatened California's coast, Elon personally coordinated with local firefighters and volunteers, deploying drone swarms not just for surveillance but to plant native seeds and monitor regrowth. The wildfire was contained faster than predicted, and new growth appeared within months, a tangible reminder that technology and nature could collaborate. As the listening network grew, it faced challenges too. Some critics dismissed it as idealistic or impractical. Others worried that focusing on listening might slow urgent action. But Elon always responded with the same clarity: urgency without understanding breeds mistakes. Listening speeds up wisdom. His words echoed through workshops and webinars, reminding everyone that technology alone could not solve humanity's deepest crises. On a particularly cold evening in December, Elon sat with Lila Ramos once more, reflecting on the journey that had begun with a single question on Joe Rogan's podcast years earlier. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd answered differently?" she asked. Elon laughed softly. "Every day. But I also know that the answer wasn't really mine to give. It was ours to discover." The story of Elon Musk, once defined by rockets and electric cars, had transformed into a story of connection, humility, and hope. A story that reminded the world that the most powerful question might not be, "What can we build?" but "How can we listen?" And in that listening, the future was not just imagined, it was born. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived on a brisk autumn evening at a small, understated venue in Austin, Texas. The event was not a flashy product launch or a grand announcement but a gathering titled, "The Future of Listening," hosted by the Listening Network and attended by a curious mix of scientists, artists, activists, and everyday people who had come to witness something quietly revolutionary. Elon Musk, now a figure transformed from the relentless innovator into a humble catalyst for empathy, stepped onto the stage. No elaborate set, no glowing screens, just a single spotlight and a simple wooden chair. The crowd hushed, anticipation hanging in the air like electricity before a storm. Elon smiled gently and began not with technology but with a question: what if the greatest invention of the future isn't a machine, but a way to truly hear each other? The audience leaned in, captivated. Over the next hour, Elon spoke candidly about his journey, from ambitious rockets and electric cars to the realization that progress required something deeper: connection. He recounted the moments of doubt, the failures, and the quiet lessons learned in the soil of that adobe home near New Mexico. He shared stories from the Listening Network's projects. How virtual reality had bridged cultural divides, how augmented reality had turned crises into communal healing, and how a simple act of listening had rekindled hope in places long forgotten. His words weren't rehearsed or polished, they were raw and sincere, carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of humility. Midway through the talk, a young girl from the audience asked, "How do we keep listening when the world feels so loud and broken?" Elon's eyes softened. By remembering that every voice matters, even the smallest. By creating spaces where silence is not emptiness but possibility. And by never losing faith in the human heart. After the event, a small circle formed on stage. Elon invited attendees to share their own stories of listening and change. A firefighter spoke of how drones helped save a neighborhood by planting seeds in burnt soil. A teacher described how her students used augmented reality to tell the stories of their immigrant families. An artist shared a poem inspired by the humming of bees. Elon listened intently, nodding with quiet gratitude. Outside, the night sky was clear, stars twinkling like distant promises. Elon stepped outside for a moment, looking up at the vastness that had once consumed his dreams. Now, those dreams were less about conquest and more about stewardship. He thought of his children, of the generations yet to come, and of the fragile planet they all shared. The next morning, Elon published a short essay online titled, "The Last Invention." In it, he wrote that the ultimate creation humanity could achieve was not a new device or discovery but a global capacity to listen with empathy, patience, and respect. He called it, "the invention that will save us all." The essay went viral, inspiring conversations from boardrooms to living rooms. It sparked initiatives worldwide to teach listening as a skill equal to reading and math, to design cities that encouraged conversation and community, and to rethink education as a practice of empathy. In the years that followed, Elon's vision took root in unexpected ways. Schools implemented listening hours, where students shared stories across cultures. Cities redesigned parks and public spaces to facilitate dialogue. Governments adopted policies encouraging citizen assemblies to guide decisions. The listening network expanded into a global movement, one that valued every story, every voice, every silence as essential to the human tapestry. Elon, meanwhile, remained quietly in the background. He returned to his garden and workshop, content to watch the seeds he had planted grow into forests. In a rare interview toward the end of his life, he reflected on the journey. "The question Joe Rogan asked me all those years ago, it wasn't just a question for me. It was a question for all of us. And the answer isn't simple or final. It's a practice. A commitment to keep listening, even when it's hard, even when we disagree, even when we're afraid." The world had changed, shaped not only by technology but by the renewed art of understanding. Elon Musk's story was no longer about a man who stunned the world with answers but about a man who opened the door to a question that continues to inspire and challenge humanity: how well do we listen? And in that question lay the hope for a future both surprising and deeply human. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?